Shannon, so good to have you with us this afternoon.
It is an honor to join you guys.
Yeah. And I brought the A team with me today, okay?
I see that.
The two of us have been doing stuff together for what now, 59, about 60 years.
60 years.
And so it's pretty easy for us. And
It's good.
Well, and I thank you because like so many people I'm sure watching this, the work that you have done, the music that you have created and shared with the world, really, I feel like in so many ways is the soundtrack of my life from a little kid through now. I mean, just to look over your catalog and these words and these melodies, that for me as a kid, so much of your children's music just instilled those things in my heart. And I was singing a little bit before I got started. You don't want to hear that, but with my husband, just some of the old songs. I wonder how it felt to wake up in the belly of a whale, and those things that just remember. Gosh, you guys have really just blessed the world so much, and it's an honor to be with you.
we have two daughters and a son. And I can remember and try to encourage our two girls, you need to look at broadcast journalism. And this was back probably before Jessica Savage and some of the early ones, started doing this. And they said, why, Daddy? And I said, because I'm tired of hearing news from men, to be honest with you. So, and then Gloria, when you were young, I think you kind of considered that, right?
I considered in some area of news, I thought I'd be the first Barbara Walters. There wasn't one then.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but words have always been my strong suit. So I considered that,
So because of that, when we first heard you and saw you doing the news, I told Gloria, this girl's good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And there are a lot of pioneers. You mentioned names like Jessica Savage and Barbara Walters and so many people who went before me, so that when I started to look at this as a career, it never occurred to me that a woman couldn't be, the nightly news anchor or the reporter in the field around the world or here at home. So I'm super grateful for those women who really, they laid the path for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, you do a good job. Your first book, a #1 New York Times best-selling book, Women in the Bible. Why did you do that? Why did you pick that subject?
Honestly, Fox had this idea of doing a book and came to me and said, we know that your faith is very important to you. And we're thinking about this project, some kind of book that would speak to women, would be religious in nature. Would you be interested in collaborating on this book? And normally, I say, let me pray about it. Let me think about it. Let me get some counsel. But something in me immediately just said, yes, I want to do this. I want to tackle this. It felt like a huge blessing that the Lord brought into my life. And so it was right in the middle of the worst of COVID, for very early on when there was so much we didn't know, when we were all isolated in our homes. And it turned out to be a gift to me because I grew up in church. I knew these stories, but I had this more concentrated time to really study and get to know these women more, especially some of the more obscure stories that people might not know about. And it just reminded me over and over again that women, sometimes people think, oh, they're just second class in the Christian faith, or they're just a footnote in these biblical stories. But scripture just absolutely defies that God sees them as equals, as valuable, can work through their lives, use them in ministry and all kinds of acts of daring. And so I thought, gosh, what a beautiful thing to lift these stories out of the Bible. They don't need anything added to them, but just to put them in a format maybe that somebody who wouldn't pick up the Bible or is intimidated or doesn't know that these stories are tucked in there, to highlight them. And we had no idea there would be such an amazing response. And I think people needed that encouragement and inspiration that some of these women, faithful from the beginning and all the way through, and others made horrible decisions, got way off track. But through all of it, God was working and he could use that. And I think that's an encouraging message for all of us. We're all flawed and going to make mistakes. And I'm a sinner saved by grace who needs his mercy every day. And I think these women's stories just illustrate that.
I was so impressed with the depth and breadth of your treatment of them and your attention to detail. We read those stories, I think even, all the Bible stories pretty surfacely, and there's so much humor and there's so much, irony and things tucked in. And you didn't miss a trick. I mean, it seems like you got everyone. So I was really tickled about that, and had picked your book for, I have a little Bible study that meets on Monday night, and they did until COVID. And so we had picked your book for the next season, and then COVID hit. So we haven't actually met even until now. So I was really disappointed because I thought it was such an in-depth discussion because the book was in-depth.
Thank you. And I learned so much. Like I said, growing up in church and hearing these stories and the little flannel graphs on the Sunday school, the felt board. And, I'd read these things. I went through K through 12 Christian school. I went to Liberty University. I was one class away from a theology minor. So I know the word, but man, I learned a ton. I realized how much I didn't know about these women. And it was interesting to me to look back at the customs of the time, what that really teaches us, giving us better context of these women's lives. And, a couple of theologians that I could reach out to and say, well, what did this mean in the original Greek or Hebrew? What does this word or this phrase actually mean in a more literal interpretation? So it was a learning process for me. And I found that to be really enjoyable.
And you talk about a blazing crusader, Jesus, within that culture where it was really tough to take the stands that he took. Pretty amazing. And for those who are critical of the Christian faith from a female perspective, I don't think they know the scriptures that well, because Jesus was certainly a believer in the possibilities of women.
Mm-hmm. And we see that again and again. It's not a mystery. As you said, he sort of broke the norms of the time. He was a bit of a revolutionary. If you look at the way that he treated the scriptures, the way that he valued women, they were part of his ministry and traveled with him and were very involved. We think about Mary and Martha and how Mary was there studying at his feet with the men. I mean, that would not have been something that the rabbis of the time, it wouldn't have been a normal thing. But he said, she's chosen the better thing. And so I thought, what a beautiful thing to just show people what Christ was doing in that moment. Going to the women who were outcast, the woman who was caught in adultery. And he said, I don't condemn you. Go from your sin. That was clear. Turn from that. But go on and live your life now and stay away from that thing and know that I love you. I accept you. So he was about going to the outcasts of society. I think about the Samaritan woman at the well. That's a perfect example too. And he was there to heal, not to condemn the sin, but always to try to save and redeem the life of the woman or the man that he was in contact with. So he did things that, the crowds of the day, the religious leaders of the day thought were way out of bounds. But I think over and over again, he's telegraphing how important these women were to him.
Yeah. And not just with women, but with like healing a woman that most people thought, oh, she's old enough to die. It was Peter's mother or grandmother. And Jesus said, no, she's of value. I'm going to heal that woman. I'm going to heal this little 12-year-old. He broke all the gender and generational boundaries all the time.
And I think
Absolutely.
also the culture at the time was a lot more kind with flawed men than they were with flawed women. And I think Jesus came along and evened that out.
He did. I think about the story of the woman who had the issue of bleeding for 12 years. It's one of my favorite stories in the Bible. We don't know her name, but clearly it was important that God wanted it there because it's in multiple Gospels. But when we meet her, she's penniless. She has nothing left. She's been from doctor to doctor. She has no hope. And really, as you mentioned, the culture of the time, she would have been an outcast, probably not allowed to go to the market or to the temple. She would have been considered unclean. And yet she heard about Jesus and she thought, if I can just touch the hem of his garment, that's all I need. I think that's enough to heal me. And he was pressed in with crowds around him all the time. And so when she comes upon him, she doesn't even ask for anything face to face from him. She just touches that hem of his garment and she's immediately healed. He knows it. She knows it. And the power has gone out from him, it said, to heal her. It was immediate. And, Jesus looks around and says, who touched me? And one of his disciples is sort of like, everybody's trying to touch you all the time. There were crowds everywhere. I can almost hear sort of a laugh in his voice. But Jesus obviously knew that it was this woman who was in desperate need. And so he turns around and we're told in all of the accounts, she falls down trembling before him because she's been outed now. She shouldn't even be there. And here she's reached out to this holy man, and without permission. And he turns around, in every account, the very first thing he says to her is daughter. And I love that, just showing he's not only telegraphing to her, wow, I accept you, I love you, I see you, you've done nothing wrong. But to anyone there who could have been a critic of hers, he's immediately shut that down and said she did the right thing. And he gives her credit and says, your faith has made you whole. And she's able to go on from there. And imagine, I think about the 12 years of suffering, how horrible that was for her. But now to go back to her community, to anybody who knew her, to be able to tell this story, like, my life is completely changed. This guy healed me. He's the real deal. He's the Son of God. It makes me feel like there's purpose in her suffering. There was all of those 12 years. And certainly for us now in 2022.
Absolutely. I love that story. It's one of my favorites too. And the fact that she was not even supposed to be out in the streets, and the courage that she had. And I'm sure the fear when she said, oh, I've been caught. But all of those things figure into that.
You know what I call that? I call that good news. That is really,
absolutely,
that's good news. Shannon, is this book just for mothers and daughters?
It's not. And the funny thing is, with Women of the Bible Speak, I had men say to me that they had read it and they had then gifted it to other people and shared it. But this one too, not everyone's going to be a mother. Not everyone's going to be a daughter. But there are lessons here, because we do look at mother-daughter relationships, but we also look at, spiritual mothers and daughters. We can all be mentors or mentees. And I'm kind of in that season where I have mature Christian women that I look to and glean so much from, but now I've got the next generation behind me that will come with relationship problems and career struggles and spiritual struggles. And to be able to say to them, you're sort of a spiritual daughter to me. So we see that modeled in Naomi and Ruth. We see it with Elizabeth and Mary, how God gives them both these miracle pregnancies at the same time. Elizabeth way past when she could, anybody thought she would be able to have a baby, and Mary certainly before she expected. And we see God pairing these women up to share burdens together, to essentially be spiritual mothers and daughters. And listen, just like with the last book, we do include some flawed people here, because I think it's important for us to learn from them too. I mean, Rebecca, we think about her sons, Isaac and Jacob, and what a mess that whole thing became when she decided to take sides and with one of her sons to deceive her husband, because sometimes with motherhood, you can be consumed with living through your child or not trusting God that he has a plan and getting in the way of that. So we include mothers and daughters who didn't make great decisions and those who God used despite that.
I think it's important that men read this book, because men, first of all, love their mothers in general. And men are the ones that are so defensive for their daughters. And I think that men especially would really benefit from this book. I want to ask you something about, in a culture where women are pretty much powerless, and this is worldwide, not just in biblical history, but in the history of most nations. And I'm glad you brought up Rebecca. Do you think that women are maybe enticed too much or thrown into being manipulative? Because they have to make it look like somebody else thought of it, or they have to manipulate men into doing what they think. And the mothers in the Rebecca story, I think there's that conflict, and I want you to speak to this, between knowing your kids better than the culture. Like in her case, first of all, God told her that her younger son would serve the oldest. Right. So that kind of set her off in the right direction or the wrong. Yeah. But do you think that her propensity to manipulate was because she felt like she didn't have the power to just go to her husband and say, I got this vision from God and this is going to happen?
Yeah, I wonder. And we see in the Bible when power is used to manipulate things, what a dangerous thing that is. And I wonder about that with Rebecca, because the beginning of her love story with Isaac is really, it's one of those that has humor in it and is such a beautiful thing, and how God leads Abraham's top servant, top household man to go find a wife for Isaac. And it's really beautiful. So they start off with this great love story, and you're left to wonder, at what point does Rebecca turn into this schemer where she doesn't believe or trust that God has got everything mapped out. But it's clear at some point she now takes on this idea of deceiving Isaac, her beloved husband, because it would benefit her and it would benefit her favored son. And, I weave in the book too, things that we cover in the news today, some modern day issues. We think about that college admissions scandal where there were so many parents who thought, I'm going to do this for my kid. I'm going to pay this money or fake this or fake that because I want them to have a leg up. Or the story I covered of a mom who allegedly broke into a school computer system because she was a school employee in this district and changed the votes for homecoming queen, allegedly, so her daughter would become homecoming queen. Like, all of us can get drawn aside with wanting the best, we think, for our kids, but we have to know when we do it in a way that is dishonoring God, not trusting him, or being downright deceptive, no good is going to come from that. Right. So I think it's important to look at those relationships and those things that happen in the Bible, because there are lessons for all of us. And as you said, men and women alike. I mean, we see in the new book, Mothers and Daughters of the Bible Speak, we talk about men too, and fathers, some who did a great job, some who didn't, and how that turned out for their families. It lasts for generations.
Yeah. Do mothers see gifts in their children? Going back to the Isaac Esau story, do mothers sometimes see gifts in her children that the public doesn't see, and say, in that case, the oldest son just got the blessing. That was the cultural norm. But she said, this is not the good use of their gifts, even though God had already told her. But when the two were born and they were so different, I think she recognized that indeed Isaac had the leadership qualities. So what do you do with that?
Well, I think too about Jochebed and Miriam, Moses' mother and sister. They're featured in the new book too.
Right.
And we're told that when Jochebed saw Moses, and remember, this was under the threat of the time where if you have a baby and it's a boy and it's born, that's it. The baby dies as a Hebrew woman. But we're told repeatedly through scripture that she saw something in him. And the wording there is something beyond just, I've got this beautiful baby and I love him. I would do anything for him. It was something more than that. She had sort of a spiritual vision that Moses was special, and that I'm sure that encouraged her and gave her the courage and bravery she needed to hide him and to preserve his life, because there's language there that tells us she had sort of a vision for his life, or a spiritual discernment that there was something special about him. And I think that probably equipped her to move forward and do what she did. And Miriam as his sister, her faithful daughter in that too, to go and protect him, and the amazing life story and journey that he had, ultimately resulting in redeeming and saving the entire nation of Israelites out of slavery that traveled through Exodus. So I don't think Jochebed could have seen all of that flash before her eyes when she saw Moses, but scripture clearly tells us she knew there was something different and special about him. And I think that probably in her darkest, most fearful moments, if she had them, gave her the courage to save her son.
Yeah.
Shannon, which woman in the Bible surprised you the most?
I have to tell you that in this new book, studying Bathsheba really was a surprise to me, because again, I think about everything I learned about her sort of growing up, not everything, but most of the storyline about her is that she was sort of this beautiful seductress and she entrapped David. And then, all of that came from that. But the truth is, when you look at the scripture, there's no indication that she was ever trying to catch his eye or trying to pull off some scam. I mean, he is the one who had not gone into battle with his men, as traditionally the king would have and should have done, that had that evening that he was walking around the rooftops and he saw her at a time when she was doing a ritual cleansing of herself that would have been something that would have been the culture of the day and the process of the day. And the Bible tells us, he called her to the palace. Her husband is away in battle, so who knows what she thought she might find there or why she had been called there. But there's not a lot of discussion about any kind of her falling in love with him or lusting over him or anything. It's just, we're told that he took her and he had her, and then she became pregnant. And we know the fallout that came from that, with her husband ultimately being, tried to deceive him into thinking this was his child when that didn't work, making sure he went into the most dangerous part of battle so that her husband Uriah was killed. And we just don't learn a lot about Bathsheba and her motivations during this. I mean, I think about the power differential and the fact that of course she would accept an invitation to the palace. And we don't know exactly what happened, but I think she's a lot more three-dimensional than I had originally believed. And it's easy to forget too that she ultimately is the mother of King Solomon. So she ends up raising this person who is described as the wisest person to ever live. So she must have done some things right as a mother. And we see a lot about their relationship toward the end when he's ultimately crowned king, selected as king. He has a throne brought in for her. She is the queen mother, essentially, and great honor is bestowed on her by King Solomon. So there's just a lot more to Bathsheba's story than I think at first blush. And so I definitely learned a lot more about her through this latest book.
It's an interesting character. Very interesting. And there are a lot of current news parallels that I think you could recall of power men taking advantage of younger, less wise women who adored their position.
Yeah.
The position. And
that's tricky.
Yeah, it's very tricky. And
that has been
the women
very much a headline in a conversation. And you wonder about, age and difference in maturity and, power differentials. And I think it sparked a lot of interesting conversations. And it reminds us that everything done in secret will come to light. And I think that's a good reminder for all of us, to have accountability and built into our own lives and to have, transparency and not to put ourselves in potential situations that can lead to sin and heartbreak. It's a lesson for all of us.
There was a comparison that I wondered if you made between the mother in the New Testament who wanted her two sons to get all the privilege from Jesus and how Jesus handled that. Maybe I can't remember if that was mentioned in your first book, The Women of the Bible, but it seems like that's a parallel too to some of these Old Testament stories.
It really is. That's such an excellent point. And I studied that and I thought about including that. It's not in the new book, but it is a perfect picture of looking for, trying to elevate your child that you believe in and that you want the best for, and going straight to God and making that request seems a bit bold. But I think that we all can obviously pray for our kids and ask God for the best for them. I think the danger is when we get our own ambitions and egos wrapped up in other people, and maybe you're pushing them from that motivation instead of just purely wanting to say, God, whatever you have planned for this little life, I know that I can trust you in that. And I think about women who pray for their babies before they're ever born, maybe before they're ever even pregnant, that God would lead that life. And there are times when kids are away for a season, maybe. And you think about Moses, even with Jochebed, I think about how she was brave and had prayed over him, protected him as a baby. He goes on this incredible arc of his story. But remember, there were decades where he had run and left Egypt, left his people. He'd committed murder and taken off. And I wonder about Jochebed praying for him all those years he was in his own wilderness, and her knowing that initial vision that she was gifted by God to say, this is a special baby for my purposes. And all those years that he was wandering, I got to believe she never stopped praying for him. And I think that's another beautiful lesson, because you never know how stories are going to turn around, and you can't give up on somebody who feels like they're way off track and way beyond what God may have planned for them. Because even when God himself came back to Moses and had this plan for him and is talking to him in the burning bush, Moses is like, no, don't pick me. I'm not going to be good at this. I mean, imagine God showing up and telling you, I've chosen you for X, Y, Z. And you say, I'm going to pass, God. I don't think that you can do what you're saying you can do with me.
I stutter. I'm not going to do this. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There's so much written about Mary. I think the Catholics write too much about her, maybe, and the Protestants ignore her too much. Somewhere in the middle. What were your surprising things that you learned about Mary, the woman, the mother?
I think so often our focus is on the Christmas story and Gabriel coming to her with this amazing news. I love her faithfulness, though, that she's like, as you said, let it be so. I am your servant. I am humbled. I'm ready to go. For a young woman to be that faithful, clearly God had chosen her for a reason. But sometimes I think the story stops there. It's a beautiful thing to think about the travel, Jesus being born in these humble beginnings and what Mary and Joseph must have gone through. But beyond that, we see too, even in the early years of Jesus' life, I think it's important to remember they were sort of refugees. I mean, they were on the run. God was giving them direction through Joseph and through dreams to say, you're not safe here. You have to move. And I think about picking up and being away from family and having this young little baby, that Mary was a woman on the move with this baby, running from a safety place to safety place before she ever got to go home and establish her life with him. So you get a deeper picture of her, and maybe more empathy for women who find themselves in these really difficult situations with little babies. And then we know she's there throughout his ministry, the water into wine, that first miracle at the wedding. We see her there. But even before that, the time when they leave Jerusalem, they've been visiting the temple, and Jesus isn't with them. And it takes days to find him. They finally get back there to the temple, and he's sort of like, why are you worried? You guys need to chill. You need to relax. Don't you know I'm about my Father's business? And so I think about Mary knew from the beginning she was giving birth to the Son of God, that he clearly had this divine purpose to come and save the world. But I got to think that he had brothers and sisters. You're raising other kids. You're very much a mother in the sense of, getting people fed and clothed and, whatever you got to do to stop and remember and have those moments where this is a divine child. This is the Son of God. And that temple situation, I think, was a wake up call for her to remember, like, wow, this isn't just my son. I mean, this is God's son. This is something very different. And we see her all the way through to the cross. Of course, she is there at a moment we cannot imagine any mother having to live through. She goes through that. And then even after that, we see she's in the upper room with the disciples in the early church. She is there praying. So she's never abandoned him at any point of his life. She couldn't have imagined all of these twists and turns. Yeah. So it's not just the Christmas story where we meet Mary. We really see her as a mother all throughout the beginning and middle and end of his life. So I feel like I know her in a better way, having written about her in these 2 books, and I hope others will too.
I love that she was still a Jewish mother bossing her son around when he said, "Woman, it is not my time." And she said, right. She didn't answer him. She just turns to the servant and says, "It's his time. Whatever he says, you do it." So
exactly. Mom is ready to go. And maybe, she didn't even understand. I think that she knew that he was divine. There would be something earth-shaking about what he would do. And you think about when they took baby Jesus to the temple for the rituals and the rites as a young baby, that they came across Simeon and they came across Anna, the prophetess. And even those people kind of prophesied over them. And Simeon telling them, this isn't going to be an easy road. He's going to pierce people's hearts, and this is going to be a tough thing. So I think even with the divine and the exciting things, knowing he would, eventually, she hoped save his people and the world, she had to have some inkling because of Simeon's prophecy. This was going to be really difficult at times too. So, maybe in her prodding him, knowing he was able to do something about that wedding and the wine, she maybe didn't realize the agony that was also going to be released once that official ministry started.
Yeah, I agree.
You have obviously, Shannon, done a lot of study on this topic. In our field, in Christian music, anytime prayer is talked about, it refers more to the female, like mother's prayers. I don't know how many gospel songs there have been written about mother's prayers, and you have referred to this. You want to comment on that, any about are they given more to prayer than the men were? What was your findings on this?
We see that one of the most famous prayers in the Bible is Mary. After she is pregnant, she learns her cousin Elizabeth is pregnant. They both are in this miraculous divine state. And she has this prayer where she's constantly lifting the praise back to God, this beautiful prayer about all that he's going to do, all that he's done, how glorious and wonderful he is. So she's praying even before that baby Jesus arrives. We know that she's kind of got this beautiful model for a mother's prayer. I think about Hannah too in the Old Testament and how she went into the temple desperate for a child in a situation that was so difficult for her. And she's praying with such fervor that Eli, the priest, says to her, "Woman, you're drunk, get out of here." And she's saying, "No, please, that's not what's happening here. I have a heavy heart. I have a need." She didn't even tell him what it was, but he said to her, okay, I can see that you are a faithful, honorable woman. And I go and I pray that the Lord will answer your prayers. So, she comes back years later with her little son, Samuel, to say to him, this is, who I prayed for, and I promised God I would give him to you. And he then goes on to be this incredible prophet through the Old Testament and the fulfillment of that prayer. So I think sometimes we just see this earnestness that we've seen God include these prayers of these women in the Old and New Testament, often as models for us. And I think they pray with such a heart and a passion over things that are deeply, deeply personal. And I love that those prayers are modeled there.
You brought up an interesting topic there, and I had made a note about it as I was looking through your book. The commitment of many mothers to let their children be what God wants them to be, even though it goes against everything they personally need from their children. They need love and protection. And sometimes when the women got older, but they continued to commit to what God wanted, not what they wanted. And I think Samuel is a great example of that. I can't imagine his mother saying, okay, you can have my child. Can I come visit him? Can I make him some clothes or something? Yeah.
I know that one is so touching because we see no reservation from her. I mean, she had told God, I will commit this child back to you. And that's exactly what she did. And you mentioned the clothes. I think it's such a beautiful detail in scripture that we're told she would make little robes for him. And when they would go up to their yearly visit to the temple, she would take these little robes for Samuel. I think about Eli too, thinking about, oh boy, you're giving me your toddler to come here and live and be raised, in the house of God and to serve God. But what a selfless thing to do, and to be so sure about what you're doing, that you trust God with this child you're giving up. Same thing with Moses, about how his mom, through these divine interventions and miracles, was able to keep him and raise him as a little baby, probably the same age he was given up as Samuel was, like 2 or 3 was the, sort of a weaning age for them. And now giving him to Pharaoh's daughter to say, you're going off to live at the palace and be raised with the Egyptians that are very oppressors. And Jochebed had to have a lot of faith in the Lord to say, thank you for letting me raise this child. And now I'm sending him basically to live with the enemy. But I got to trust that there's purpose in that. And boy, was there.
Yeah. Did you have any other questions you wanted to ask me?
The reason I brought that up is I'm confessing here. When we have serious issues in our home, and we need to pray about it. Maybe it's a cop-out on my part, but I'll say, honey, would you lead in this prayer? So it's really intriguing to me, and as I say, you've done the study on this, that when it comes to prayer and when it comes to believing, when it comes to this whole business we call faith, we can't prove it, okay? And so it seems like the women have taken the lead here, and you've got something, I think it's something special in the book by simply saying, hey, they have played a very, very important part in it. And maybe the most important part has been the whole area of faith and prayer. I don't know.
Yeah, I think about my mom. I mean, she has modeled the Christian faith to me better than anyone.
Yeah.
Because listen, your kids know all of your foibles and all of your flaws because they live with you 24/7.
Yeah.
And not that my mom is flawless. I think she's pretty close. But she's one of those people that if she says she's praying for you, if she's praying for you, it's not a passing conversation or something she just says. I mean, she's up, and you've got one right there with you too, Gloria. I mean, she's up in the morning. She's on her knees for hours before the sun is up sometimes, depending on the needs. I mean, she just modeled that for me, that the fervent prayer of a righteous man or woman availeth much. And I think that I always knew she was covering me in prayer when I was on track. And maybe when I was off, I knew that I could count on that with my mom. So there is maybe something special about that mother's connection with praying over her kids and praying over her home and her family. And I certainly saw that modeled with my mom. And so if you have any prayer requests, let me know. I'll pass them on to Marie.
The book is called Mothers and Daughters of the Bible Speak, released this week and is available for purchase at Amazon, Target, Walmart, or wherever books are sold. And if you'd like to order an autographed copy of this book, you can do so at You better say this one.
Signed ShannonBook.com.
Yeah.
So,
That's right.
And Shannon, while you're here, let us tell our friends, and I'm looking forward to this myself. Every Memorial Day weekend in Gatlinburg, we have what we call Family Fest, and it's 3 wonderful days of a lot of wonderful music and playing in the mountains and having a good time with the family, but also some very good speakers. And this year, you are going to be one of the featured speakers at the annual Family Fest in the Smokies in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Tickets are available at Gaither.com. That sounds very commercial, doesn't it?
it's okay. We're going to have Shannon.
I'm so excited. You guys have no idea. I feel like it's going to be a little piece of heaven, all the music and all of the fun. And I'm so looking forward to it. It's an incredible honor to be involved with you guys and to be a part of that weekend. And I look forward to meeting everybody as well.
And I would like to ask everybody to buy 2 copies of your new book, one for Mother's Day and one for Father's Day,
Yeah.
so that the dads will read this book. It definitely is a book that dads should read.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There are dads in there too. And like I said, God gives us good examples and lets us see the flawed examples too. And hopefully those are then guideposts and signposts that we can use in our own life. But again, the bottom line message to me, so encouraging that he works through all of it, good and bad.
Right.
Shannon, before you go, I'm very intrigued with your mind. Tell me what went through your mind when this young kid came to college and said, okay, obviously you're very articulate and words are easy for you. But when I look at you, I say, this girl is not only good at what she does, but your knowledge of the Bible and the scripture. Was there any kind of pull when you went to school? What do I do with this talent? Do I articulate the message of the good news? Or do I live out my life as a Christian in the secular world of telling folks very important stuff that they need to know? What was your thinking pattern and all that?
I do think that I thought about how those things could work together. My mom was very disappointed I did not major in music when I was in college because she thought
Do you sing?
that's how I was going to use my ministry or my testimony as a Christian. I grew up playing and singing in church. And I think I knew I wasn't as good as my mom thought I was. Like, I'm not going to be a performance artist. I do write a little bit, and I feel silly even saying that to you guys, but music is definitely my first love. I just didn't think it was going to be my vocation. And so, I went to school and I got my law degree. I practiced law before I ever went into news. And I really had this conundrum about whether TV news was real journalism and what I could do with it and how I would live that out. I knew it was a difficult business, traveling and moving. And I wondered how I would make that all work. But I came to a point where I believed God had given me this passion and that he was going to make a way. And so for me, it's an incredible thing now that I work at a network that wants me to write these books and allows me to talk about Jesus. It's a miracle thing to me. And I think it can only be through God's hand and his guiding. And so for the season he has me here and with the ability to marry those two things, I feel beyond blessed to be able to do that.
Well, I can't wait to hear you sing. I'll sit beside you at Family Fest.
Uh-oh. You don't want to hear that. Give me a microphone that has not turned on. And I'll
I've
sing.
sung into some of those myself.
We're asked from time to time, because we've done this for so long. We started out as school teachers. We were both English teachers, taught in the public school. But when kids ask us, what is your advice for young people about going into music? And my first response always is, get a day job.
Exactly. Which I think was going to be the fact for me. I mean, I have, I think I still have somewhere the book from you guys, the songbook where you're on the front with crayons.
Yeah.
It was a kid's songbook with all the stuff in there. And I would just sit at the piano and like bang this stuff out and I Am a Promise and all these things. And I loved it so much. Oh, here we go. With the capital P, I am a green find the love. I need my jazz hands going.
I knew kids loved to
But-
sing big words, so
Yes. And I mean, I don't know. I know you guys talked about that. Maybe you thought you were going to do other things with your lives. I can't imagine you doing anything but what you did, because it is such a huge blessing. And I think really with kids, I mean, that you're planting that in their hearts. And I remember these songs 50 years later.
But I can't tell you. I mean, first of all, when I was 19, I tried to do this, what we're doing now full time. And a good thing happened. Our little group starved to death. my best year of learning what life was all about. And that's when I went back to college and said, you know what, you better learn to do something else. And so, so we taught for 10 years.
you taught for 10 years.
Yeah. She taught about 3 years. Then we started having kids. But, and we run into teachers sometimes who say, I bet you're glad you're out of the classroom. And we say, no.
Oh, no.
We loved the classroom. I mean, it was, you know, I still run into kids who had me for a year or two, on whose life I made a much better impact. You know, like we come in at a town, we blow in and we blow out, you know. But when you teach a kid for an entire year, you can have a profound impact. And we loved it. And we especially loved to direct plays. And we would choose plays like Wilder's, Thornton Wilder's Our Town, about the importance of life and the moments and all of that. But basically, all we did was we just changed classrooms. We went to and started writing songs like we have this moment to hold in our hands and touch as it slips through our fingers like sand. Same thing Thornton Wilder was saying when Emily said, do people really realize life while they're living it? So it's interesting in looking at your life. And obviously you could do a lot of different things, but you're happy.
Well, you know, my mom's a teacher, or she's retired now, but she was a teacher forever. And I can remember people used to say to me, like, do you want to be a teacher just like your mom? But I was with her so much in the classroom. And I remember I had this thought of when I was a kid, one time I was going by her classroom and a child threw up and she had to clean it up and comfort the kid. And I thought, no, I think the job is cleaning up throw up. I don't want to do that. So I knew that being a teacher was the hardest job. And she's working at a Christian school. She's not getting paid anything. Yeah. And it was nothing but ministry for her for 40 years. And she's like you, like she loved it and knew that she was changing these lives forever.
Yeah. The big event for all of our kids was when somebody threw up in class. That was like, what was your day like? Well, Johnny threw up.
Exactly. And the teacher got to clean it up.
Shannon, the biggest reason I did not want to teach music, I minored in music because I could make easy grades in that. And I had to work in English and philosophy and that kind of thing. But the reason I did not want to teach music, I did not want to spend the rest of my life pecking out notes to kids that couldn't hear pitches. And every time I hear a high school choir slightly under the pitch, I say, God, thank you for saving me. And I tell you what, I want to say thanks to all of the music teachers who can put up with that, yes. make it work. But.
Well, and my mom taught music too. That was her original degree, was music education. And I can remember when I was in high school at one point, our chorus teacher got very ill. And so my mom took over for the semester, which was kind of my worst nightmare because then she's giving detentions to all my friends and everything. It was super embarrassing. But I can remember her being able to hear that, like you're saying, the pitch. And I remember one of our programs, we did the song, Majesty, Worship is Majesty. And we were kind of like sliding into that note, Majesty. And she would say, hit the note, don't slide into the note. So you have to hit the pitch. And I can remember most of the kids are like, it sounds the same, all of it, Majesty, Majesty. And how that drove my mom crazy as somebody who has really good pitch.
Hey, let me tell you a story on that song. That song was written by Jack Hayford. He's a pastor out in Los Angeles. And when it came out, everybody thought that we didn't sing anything except songs we had written. That's not the truth. I mean, we still worship at the shrine of a great song. I don't care what it is. I mean, if it's a good song. When that came out, I went, oh, man. So we started singing it all over the country. And we were in arenas at that time and sing it again, Majesty, Majesty. And so people started thinking that we wrote it. And they'd come up and say, Bill, of all the songs you have written, Majesty has to be my most favorite.
No.
And I'd say, no, I haven't. So I was telling this to Jack Hayford. I said, I did that for the first 2 or 3 years, Jack. Finally, after 3 or 4 years, I said, when they'd say, of all the songs, I just say, thank you.
Thank you
Well,
very
it's
much.
like when I'll meet people in a airport or something like that, and I'm talking about, oh, we're so excited, we love Fox News, and then they'll walk away and say something like, I can't believe I just met Dana Perino, and I'm like, okay, thank you, that's a compliment. Dana's wonderful, and I'm glad you confused me with her. And so I just don't correct people sometimes, like, close enough.
You are darling.
Same
This
thing.
has been such a delight. I can't wait to meet you in person.
I can't wait to see you guys. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure, and I look forward to our weekend.
You are a delight.
Thank you.
I thought Windsor, our little Cavalier dog, was a delight, but this
you've
Will I get to meet
Top
Windsor?
oh, I
You
wish
want
we'd
to
have
be
brought him in. I wish we'd have brought him
Will
in.
he be at the Family Fest?
Probably not
Maybe?
because we're going to be there too long.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll see pictures of Windsor then.
Yeah, we'll show you pictures. Blessings. Good to,
Okay, can't wait to see you. God bless you guys.
good to
Have a
see
good
you.
day.
Yeah,
Bye bye.
that's fun.